Hello everyone, Matt here with Grafted Homestead. Today I'm just going to put together a quick little video on canning. Now, quick disclaimer before any of this, there are a lot of different types of canners out there, a lot of different stoves, a lot of different variables, and so if you plan on canning your own, make sure you read the book or watch videos or something on the one that is specific for your needs. I'm going to explain what my needs are and what I'm doing here, and if these follow what you're going to be doing, and hopefully this is helpful, then well, hopefully it helps. With that said, the canner I'm using here is the Presto 23 quart pressure canner. So this is one you can pick up at a lot of big box stores. I was extremely lucky to get this one from my father, and so that's what we'll be using. And so this canner comes in several different pieces. You have the lid and the gauge. You want to be very careful with this lid. I always store it upside down, because if this gets knocked or loose, it's going to be a problem. On the lid, you're going to have a couple different parts. You're going to have this little black rubber gasket. This is a emergency release, and so if this canner gets to too high of a pressure level, you've stopped paying attention to it or something, the idea is that this will blow out and release the pressure. You're then going to have your steam vent here. This is where we will put our weight, and that will help to build the pressure inside. And then the other object you have is here our little latch, or a little steam security latch, I guess, if you will. And so when this fills up with steam, this will ride on the steam, and when it does so, it will lock on here, and so that you won't be able to open it up. This is how you know when the pressure's all the way gone, it falls down, and when it's up, you have pressure in here, obviously. The lid has some grooves in here that attach to onto the lock, and so it won't pop open. You also have a rubber gasket in here, or seal. This you want to wash well and take care of, and that fits right in there. We have our 23 quart pot here that is kind of hard to see on camera, but there are some lines or grooves cut out in here, and those are for the different water levels. So if you're going to do water bath canning and you want the water over them, you can do it that. Now this is pressure canning, so we just use 3 quarts, which is that bottom line. You don't want the jars sitting directly on the bottom of the heat source. They can bust, and so we have this little metal piece that fits in on the bottom, and the jars will sit right on that. Now if you're doing the half pints like I was, and you wanted to do 2 layers, I do have a second one of these as well, so you could put this down, put the jars on, put another one on top, and some more jars. We're only using 1 today. Now another thing that this comes with, I'm not sure what the actual name of this is. It probably says in the book. My wife's always called it the teacher. I don't know what that means, but I think it sounds funny. So this is the teacher. It goes this is the weight. And so this is what will sit on the steam release there and help it to build pressure. Now if you have a different canner, like the All-American canner, or some of the different ones out there, I do know their weights are weighted different for 10, 11, 15 pounds of pressure. So you put the appropriate weight on. With this, or this Presto canner, the weight is the same. That does not matter. You control the heat and the gauge here to get your pressure. So we have that, and then we have instruction book. Like I said before, you want to make sure you read the instructions specific to your canner and to canning recipes. With anything you can get yourself very sick if it's not done correctly, or get your family sick. So you want to make sure you follow canning recipes until you're real familiar with what you're doing, at least. In the one we're doing today, I'm going to be making a chicken vegetable broth, and so that in itself, I add a bunch of salt too, so it's saltier broth, and the salt is what is going to help preserve it. And so we've found our recipe in here for the chicken stock, and so we make what I did was I took the leftover carcass from the chicken we cooked, put it in, and with some vegetables. I let that cook for 2 days just to boil everything down. I like to skim the fat off the top. You don't want a ton of fat in your canning. That can cut down on the preservation of it. And so with all those things in mind, I'm not doing the video on how to make that stock. We can do those later if you would like. Leave that in the comments. This is more so on how to do it. So we went ahead and we made the stock, and I'll show that, and then we follow our instructions. Elevation has a lot to do with canning. So if you're at sea level, here you want to bring our stock, for example, to 11 pounds of pressure. Here in New Mexico, I'm sitting at about 5,300 feet, 5,300 feet to 6,000 feet here. And so I want to bring mine up to 13 psi, 14 or 15 for meat, but what we're doing is 13, so I'm at pounds. So I'm going to bring that up to 13 pounds there. And then the recipe here says 20 minutes for pint jars. I'm going to be doing half pints for mine, and we'll show that. I'm still going to run it for 20 minutes. Something else to keep in mind is the stove you're using. Now I'm using an electric stove. It's a little bit older. I don't really suggest electric stoves if you have the opportunity to choose. You can get variable heat on it. You know, you can have some dead spots on the coils or whatnot. It also, that heat kicks on and off, and so it's not really steady. It's a little more difficult to do. I'm going to show you how I accomplish that with my electric stove. If you have gas, it's going to be a little different, cooking on the flame, so you'll need to do that accordingly. Also, something else to keep in mind is the temperature you're doing it at. Is the room extremely cold or extremely hot? That's going to take into account for how you're going to control your temperature. Also how much you pack your canner. So if you have this really packed with a ton of jars in here and a lot of food, heavier foods and things, that's going to take a lot longer to bring up to temperature, and then it's going to take longer to bring that down if you need. It'll hold that temperature. In today's, I'm only doing 6 half pint jars of our broth, and so that's only going to be a few of them in here. That's not going to retain a ton of heat, and that will fluctuate quicker if I don't watch the temperature. With all those things in mind, let's go ahead and jump into the project here.
Alright, so the first thing we're going to want to do is make sure we wash and clean all of our equipment really thoroughly, all the jars, the canner itself, get it nice and clean. For what we're canning today, we did a chicken broth. I just used the chicken carcass from the dinner before, put that in the crock pot with some water. There's a little bit of vegetable in there. Light on the spices because canning will intensify that. A little heavier on the salt to help preserve. I boiled that for 2 days in the crock pot, skimmed off as much fat as I could from the top, and then strained it out. We want to go ahead and add our metal tray to the bottom of the canner to keep the cans off the bottom of the heat directly. We're also going to add in 3 quarts of water. Now there's little notches marked on the inside of the canner from the manufacturer. Those denote how much water you need for different things. Consult the instruction manual. For what we are using, we're going to be putting in 3 quarts of water. We just use tap water, it's not too hard. So I'll put in 3 quarts of water into our canner. We also are going to add just about half a teaspoon or so of white vinegar to the canner. That's just to help keep everything clean. That's not necessary, but it's something I do. Okay, so we're going to want to go ahead and set the stove to a medium temperature. We're going to bring our canner up to temperature and put our jars in it to bring them up to temperature as well, to about the broth that we're cooking, so we don't break the glass. I also want to start filling a small saucepan with some water, bring that up to a medium temperature, and we add in our lids and rings to sterilize and warm up the seals. Next step is we want to make sure that we have all of our supplies and things ready to do the job. So we're going to go ahead and fill a small dish with some white vinegar. This is used to clean the rims of the jars after they're filled, so as to take off any fats or anything like that that might prevent it from sealing. What we want to do here in New Mexico is raise our pressure to 13 pounds, and we're going to run it for 20 minutes. Always make sure you check the book that came with your canner, as that's specific to how many pounds you need and for how long. With these half pint jars, we'll be running it for 20 minutes at 13 pounds. So I'm going to go ahead and remove our jars now that they've heated up in the water and are just about as warm as the broth. We are going to add our funnel into our jar so as to help keep the rim as clean as possible, and begin pouring our broth into the jar. When we do this, you do want to leave a good 1/2 inch to inch headspace between the top of the jar and the top of the liquid or the items. In this one, I probably could have filled it a little fuller, but it will do just fine. Now we are doing liquids here. If we were doing solids, we'd want to make sure we get any air bubbles out and really pack that down. With that said, next step is to clean the rim of the jar off. You want to make sure there's no fats or oils on that. That will prevent it from sealing and preserving. So we take a damp cloth with vinegar and clean that. I also want to take our heated sanitized lids with our little magnet stick. You could also use a fork or something to move it, and place that on with our ring. And we'll take the ring and just hand tight it down. Don't really crank it down, just hand tight. And we'll place that in our canner that has been running at temp. So once we got that in, we're going to go ahead and do the other 5 jars and get all 6 jars filled and in our canner. Now that the canner is full, we want to do a quick inspection of our lid. Just make sure there's no obstructions and everything is right with the vents. I'm going to get that locked into place and turn so we can see it. I'm going to go ahead and to start getting it to temp, we want to turn the temperature of the stove up to about 7 or 8, just below high on my electric stove. Now that we got it pretty high at temp, you're going to notice a lot of steam and some bubbles coming out, a little bit of water. Until that steam valve really gets going, you will notice some of that. You shouldn't afterwards. So it's been roughly 5 minutes since we've started it here just below high. You will notice that steam release valve will pop up and stop shaking around like that. There we go. So you want to give that a couple minutes to go ahead and stabilize, as well as our steam vent. So this is our weight. Our weight's going to go on top of the steam vent once we've allowed that to steam for about 5 minutes. Now that 5 minutes has passed, our steam valve is up and we're getting steady stream of steam out of the vent. We will go ahead and put the weight on. This is going to allow pressure to begin building inside of our unit. Now that pressure is building, we have our temperature setting, or our dial on the electric stove, at about 7 or 8, just below high. We want to keep it there until our dial hits about 5 pounds of pressure there. I cannot stress enough right now how important it is you watch the dial. Depending on how much you have in it, the temperature can fluctuate a lot. Do not go outside. Do not walk away. Watch the dial. I cannot stress this enough. Okay, now it's been about 3 or 4 minutes. We're just about at 5 psi. Next step is going to be to turn the dial down. On my stove, we're going to put it at about 3.5 on the dial on the electric stove and allow that to sit there until we hit about 7 pounds of pressure. This will happen very quickly, so make sure you're watching it. You don't want the temperature to go up, or the pressure to go up and down. That will cause siphoning and pull stuff out of your jars. Start with the lower temperature and go slow and work your way up is best. Now that we're at about 7 pounds, we want to turn the temperature down. On my stove, I'm going to put this just above simmering and let it build until it hits about 11 pounds of pressure. From there until 13, I will turn it down a little bit more, even into simmering, and let it slowly hit 13 pounds. You don't want this to happen quickly. You want it to happen slowly. You also don't want that needle to go down. So lower temperature, let it build. Watch the dial. Do not walk away. Do not go outside or have fun. It's tempting. Watch the dial. things can change very quickly in the canner and you can end up with problems. So do not leave, do not mess with the dial a lot. If it goes a little bit over 13 pounds, that is okay. You don't want it going up. Okay, so after we've been letting it slowly build, it's approaching 10, 11 pounds very slowly. I haven't been messing with the dial at all. Depending on how much you have in there, if there's a lot of product in there you're canning, it's going to hold temperature. Awesome, so it's been about 22 minutes since we've started all together. We are going to go ahead and lower the temperature a little bit just into simmering and let that build up until we hit about 13 pounds. So on my stove, I happen to know it sits just about high into simmering there. Okay, so now it's been 27 minutes. We've hit our desired 13 pounds for our altitude and what we're canning. I'm going to turn the temperature down just a little bit. That's because I want it to stay stable. I don't want it to be dropping or rising much at all. Now, I know it will rise just a little bit, maybe almost a pound. That's okay. I don't want to freak out, cut the temperature down more, or move the dial and have that going up and down. That is what's bad. So we can go ahead and start our 20 minutes that our book says we need. And so we will start that and run it at 13 pounds for 20 minutes. Watch the dial. Do not walk off during this because you don't want it moving up and down. I say watch the dial with your eyes. Do not be adjusting too much. Don't freak out. It's the swings that are bad. Awesome, so our 20 minutes has just about elapsed. Our pressure is at about 13 3/4, almost 14 pounds. That is okay. It has not been going up and down, just slowly creeped up to about there. Not a problem at all. Temperature is just about where we had put it. And as soon as we hit our 20 minutes, in 30 seconds here, we will go ahead and turn the stove off and move it off the burner very carefully, so we don't want things sloshing around. We don't want to hit any of the pieces on the top. Alright, and so we've made it to our full 20 minutes at our 13 3/4 pressure there, so we should have successfully canned. I'm going to go ahead and turn the temperature off of the stove completely. Do not touch the teacher. Do not touch the steam valve. You don't want to touch anything. Let it go down by itself. I told you before you must watch the dial and do not leave. I now say leave. Go outside. That's okay. Do not pay attention to it. Don't touch it. So our pressure valve now says it's at 0. Still do not touch anything until that safety valve has dropped. Don't remove the weight. Just let it sit. A few minutes later, your safety valve will drop. I've come back. It's completely cool. You can remove the weight at this point, open the lid, check your jars, and move along with the process. And so there is no pressure left in there. We are sure after that safety valve has fallen. I can remove the lid, let some of the steam off. I like to crack it so I don't blast myself with steam, and let that vent for a few. But we can see that all of our jars, nothing is broken. That is good. Okay, so we have a few minutes. We have the lid open. We can see all of our jars are doing good. We're going to go ahead and remove them from the canner. Make sure you use your tool there. These can be extremely hot. You don't want to burn yourself, so get a good grip. And we're going to move them onto a towel where they can sit and cool. Normally I let these cool overnight. These are half pint jars, so we'll probably only do about 12 hours or so. what you're looking for is as they cool, the top, the lid, will pop. It'll make a popping sound most of the time, and it suctions down. And so you'll be able to feel when you press on it, it doesn't pop up and down. And so that's a good seal. All of my jars you can see are all at about the same liquid level. That means there was no siphoning, so nothing pulled out of them. We did a really good job with this canning session.
Okay, so it's been about 12 hours since I've pulled the cans here, and they're all sitting at the level that I had filled them at. Now I could have filled those just slightly fuller, but that's where I went. So anyways, there was no siphoning though, or very little, so that looks good. By feeling them, I had heard a bunch of them pop right away when I had placed them down pretty much. And I can feel they're all pressed down, so the lids aren't popping up at all. That means they have a good seal on them. And so what I can do is I can go ahead and now that they've cooled down, these are just the half-pint jars, so they're cool. If they were larger, I'd let them sit all night. But what I'll do is I'll take the rings off, we'll wash the jars, just wash down the outside with just a little bit of soap and water, being careful not to pop that lid off, but those are on there pretty good. Just to make sure any bacteria is off, we'll wash the ring, put that aside, and the jars will go on the shelf. Okay, so I have the water running warm. You don't want it too hot or too cold. Warm works fine. I've removed the ring. This lid is on here pretty good and tight. It does take a knife or something to pull it off with a good seal. So I don't need to be too careful, but we don't want to pop it off. So I just put a little bit of soap on the outside. Wash it down. Washing not to pull that lid off. And you see some of the fats in there. That shouldn't be too big of a problem, but normally I'd like to get more of that out of it. And we'll, once I got these all done and dry, we'll mark the lids and leave them rings off, just the lid on there. You do that because if moisture things gets up under here, or the lid does happen to pop and some of the stuff leaks out, you can get rust and some nasty things with that. So we just take the ring off and we'll go ahead and do all these. Anyways, thank you very much for watching this simple Presto canner video. There's a lot of different canners, a lot of different types and different stoves and all kinds of things, so you need to watch lots of videos for what you have and find out what works best for you. But if this is something that's going to help out, then I do highly suggest it. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it, leave a comment, that definitely helps, and I appreciate you guys very much. Thank you. If you're still waiting on the the quail cooking video, I have not forgot. Just time has gotten away and it has been busy this last few weeks, but we will be taking a couple of those guys out of freezer camp soon enough here and getting them in the oven and showing some delicious recipe. Stay tuned.